Awesome. So I am back for part 2 of discussion number 4. So I'm going to share my screen and we are going to go over the different brain regions. Awesome. Okay, so first we have the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is kind of at the center of the brain, right here in the diencephalon region. And what we see is that it is responsible for homeostasis and behavioral drives. So for this first portion, I kind of wanted to just put the terms of all these different brain areas in one or two words or a few words, and then we'll go ahead and answer the questions. But this is what I'm doing first, just kind of summarizing them. So the hypothalamus is responsible for maintaining homeostasis, which is huge, and also our behavioral drives. Here's a little extra information about the hypothalamus that you can find in your textbook, but I wanted to add it here just so you can have an idea of all of those homeostatic functions it has, as well as those behavioral drives. So go ahead and review this on your own. I'm not going to walk you step through this, but that's what we're discussing. Then we have the thalamus. The thalamus is known as the integrating center of our brain. It's the relay station for our sensory and motor input. So sensory input comes from our 5 senses. Motor input comes from like our skeletal muscle and other areas. So it kind of relays information from the neurons that are being sent up into our brain. It does the relay for us. And then we have the action that is sent out through another set of neurons. So we have afferent neurons and efferent neurons, and the integrating neurons, the inner neurons, are in the thalamus and in the spinal cord as well. Next, we have the cerebral cortex. So this is kind of this entire area. So we see the cerebral cortex has 3 different functions. It has sensory, motor, and association functions. So sensory, it helps us with perception. Motor, it helps with skeletal muscle movement. And association, it also is an area of integration of information and direction for voluntary movements. So some of the brain regions have kind of overlapping functions. So just expect that. So here's a little bit more information on the cerebral cortex from your textbook. So you can go ahead and look at this if you would like. It does help your understanding a little bit, I think. So next we have the cerebellum. The cerebellum helps with movement coordination. It's this little small brain. That's what it's normally referred to as, the small brain, down at the base of the brain, and it helps with movement. So if you ever get a bad injury at the back of the base of your skull, that's why you might be paralyzed, because there is a lot of movement coordination that occurs there. You may not be paralyzed, but you may lose, you may have partial body paralysis or just incorrect coordination of your skeletal muscles. Then we have the basal nuclei, which are not pictured in this picture. You can see them here. Sometimes they're called the basal ganglia as well, and they exist inside of like the spinal cord and in that cerebral cortex. But what we see is they also help with the control of movement. So sometimes overlapping things here again. Then we have the limbic system. The limbic system contains the amygdala and the hippocampus. So the amygdala is responsible for emotion and memory, whereas the hippocampus is dealing with learning and memory. So the hippocampus is kind of like more long-term memory. Short-term memory. So if you think about that movie, what is it called? 50 First Dates with Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore, how she could remember her childhood and everything. She had no damage to her amygdala because the amygdala is long-term memory. However, she couldn't remember each date she was having every day. So she did have some type of damage to her hippocampus affecting her short-term memory. Here's a little bit extra information on the limbic system that you can review on your own. All right, so next we have the midbrain. So this is part of the brain stem. So here you can see the midbrain, and it helps with eye movement. So a part of the midbrain, or a part of the brain stem that you definitely don't want to injure, as it deals with eye movement. Then we have the medulla oblongata, which is this structure right here. It is control of involuntary functions, so like our heart rate and things like that. Sorry about that, had to take another phone call. But again, the medulla oblongata deals with involuntary functions such as like heart rate and breathing. And then lastly, or not lastly, we have the pons, the last part of the brainstem that we're going to discuss. And this is a relay station between the cerebrum, the small brain, and the cerebellum, the large brain. So it also helps with the coordination of breathing. So it kind of helps our brain communicate with itself as well. So now lastly, we'll look at the spinal cord. This is the spinal cord here, extending from the brainstem all the way down to about one of the lumbar vertebra. And we see that it is a major pathway for information flowing back and forth between the brain, skin, joints, and muscles of the body. So it is very, very important. And we have this vertebral column that protects it, these spiny vertebra that are very important features to protect the spinal cord from being injured. Because if the spinal cord is punctured or, damaged in any way, it will most likely lead to paralysis or death. So the spinal cord is a very fragile and important feature of the body. We also see it deals with spinal reflexes, and we'll get into those at some point in this class. I can't remember exactly when though. All right, so our first question on the chart is what influences muscle activity, inhibits unnecessary motor movements, and coordinates slow, sustained contractions? That's our basal nuclei. Also, one thing I wanted to mention is I would definitely go through this worksheet first, these questions that were given, and see if you can answer them from the information that we just discussed before, and go ahead and check your understanding here. Our next one is asking what are the vital reflex centers for the cardiovascular, vasomotor, and respiratory system. That's going to be the medulla oblongata mainly, because that's our center of involuntary control. We also see the pons plays some role in there. What regulates anterior nervous or autonomic nervous system activity? So autonomic nervous system is our autopilot, so our involuntary functions of the body. That will be the medulla oblongata, as well as the pons and also the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus does some hormonal things that will also control the autonomic nervous system through the release of like neurotransmitters and hormones. Then we have the thalamus. This question asks us what edits sensory information, which is passed on to the cerebral cortex, or relays motor signals coming out of this cerebral cortex. So this is the thalamus. So we see sensory impulses come in and motor signals come out. So sensory and afferent you can always pair together. Motor efferent you can always pair together. So motor efferent, I always think of like skeletal contraction. So a bee lands on your arm, the sensory receptors and sensory nerves in your arm pick it up, bring it up to the brain. The thalamus relays that. We integrate, hey, there's a bee on our arm, and we send a motor efferent impulse to our bicep to pull our arm away from the bee. So that is the thalamus. It is that relay center that will edit that information, tell us what we need to do with it, if it's strong enough, things like that, or if it's scary or stressful or what, and then relay that motor signal. Our biological clock, which regulates our daily patterns, including wake and sleep cycles, is the hypothalamus. At the hypothalamus, we have the pineal gland, or the pineal gland, and that releases I don't know if it's a hormone or a neurotransmitter, but it releases this molecule called melatonin. And I'm pretty sure most of you have heard of that before. It helps us sleep. You can buy it over the counter in an herbal form, and it definitely helps you sleep. I take it every night, and it's non-habit forming. It can give you some scary dreams sometimes, but it definitely is a great alternative if you have, issues sleeping or staying asleep. and that is the pineal gland of the hypothalamus. Next question says, where do we have memory, interpretation, integration, discrimination, localization, and language formation? That's going to be the cerebral cortex. So we have different regions of the cerebral cortex that deal with all of these things here. What contains many major reflex centers? Withdrawal, flexor reflex, and stretch reflex. That's going to be the spinal cord. Again, the spinal cord deals with reflex. So if you touch something really hot, like a stove, you don't, it doesn't travel up to your brain and you think about it and then you think, oh, I'm going to pull my hand off. No, you immediately pull your hand off. And that's because the spinal cord has this ability to cause reflexes that bypass going to the brain. So it bypasses going to the brain and just causes that action without you actually integrating, hey, I'm touching something hot. You normally realize after you touch something hot that, hey, I just touched something hot, after you pull your hand off. Not like you touch it, you think, oh, I'm touching something hot, I'm going to pull my hand off. No, you touch it, you pull your hand off. That's a reflex. Functional system responsible for emotional behavior. That's that limbic system with the amygdala and the hippocampus. What regulates body temperature? That's also the hypothalamus, that homeostatic control. If we get too hot, our cells will start to die. If we get too cold, our cells will start to die. So regulation of body temperature is also regulation of homeostasis. What receives and processes sensory information from receptor pathways and deals with perception? That's thalamus again. So, you know, a bee lands on our arm, it comes up to our thalamus in our brain. We think, oh my gosh, I'm scared of bees, I'm going to pull my hand away. If you're not scared of bees, maybe you don't. It's not something that causes a reflex. It's not like touching something hot or, you know, having a physical something that causes a reflex. You actually integrate that in the brain. You perceive, hey, I'm scared of this, or I'm not scared of this, or hey, this is that, or whatever. So we have the actual perception and not reflex at the thalamus. Involved in eye reflexes such as the pupillary reflex, consensual response, and blinking. That's going to be the midbrain. Again, midbrain deals with vision. Food intake regulates water balance. Again, the hypothalamus. These are both homeostatic functions. So to maintain homeostasis, we have hunger cues, and we also have thirsty cues, which, oh my gosh, I'm so thirsty. I've been talking for a while now. It's been a long day. And then found throughout the brainstem, reticular activating system, and also involved in motor activities and visceral activities, is the spinal cord. So it extends from the bottom of the brainstem. It has this reticular activating system, meaning it has branches off of it, spinal nerves, and it helps with motor activities and visceral activities as well. Controls several major endocrine functions. That's the hypothalamus. Hopefully you know that from a last unit. Remember, we had the hypothalamic anterior pituitary pathway, which dealt all with the release of hormones. So hormones are the endocrine system. So that's the hypothalamus. And that is it. So hopefully this makes sense to you. The textbook has a lot of good information about these different brain regions if you need some extra explanation. YouTube also helps as well. So check those out. But those are kind of the main things that Dr. Chang wants you to know about the brain regions for this class. So sorry it took me a while to get this recording out. Life has been crazy, but I will be getting this out to you in the next couple minutes, and I hope you enjoy. Have a great week, y'all. Bye.